Zion knew and was prepared to acknowledge publicly that the name of his own settlement, Morshav, Nalal, was in fact a Hebrew rendering of the name of the Palestinian Arabic village name it had replaced, Malul. However, to give it a biblical authenticity, the Hebrew-sounding Nalal was linked by the Zionists to a name mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. Also, Kibbutz Gvat, set up in 1926, was a Hebrew rendering of the former Arabic place name. The Palestinian village Jibter, Gvat, also echoed the Aramaic name Gvater, meaning hill, and a biblical name in there. Galilee, central to the construction of Zionist collective identity, and subsequently Israeli identity, based on a biblical memory, was the Yishuv Tarponimic projects established in the 1920s to restore biblical Hebrew or to create new biblical-sounding names of symbolic meaning to Zionist redemption of the land and colonization of Palestine, Riad 2010. 189. In the 1920s, the Palestinian land of Wadi al-Hawarith 18 in the coastal region was purchased, redeemed by the Jewish National Fund from Arab absentee landlords, subsequently leading to the eviction of many Arab farmers. The Jewish settlement of Kfar Haroui was established in 1934 on these lands. The Arabic name was rendered into the Hebrew-sounding Emek Hefer, the Heifer Valley. In some cases, the Zionist Hebrew colonizing toponymy simply translated Arabic names into Hebrew. In the 1920s, a JNF naming committee was set up to name the newly established Jewish colonies in Palestine to compete with the overwhelmingly Arabic map of the country. Its renaming efforts were appreciated by the British mandatory authorities and were incorporated into the Palestine government's official gazette, Benvenisti 2002, 26. In the pre-1948 period, many new Hebrew place names displaced the Arabic names. For instance, the first Zionist settlement in Palestine, Peter Tikva, was originally set up in 1878, deserted and then re-established in 1882 on the lands of, and eventually replacing, the destroyed Palestinian village of Mlabis. Peter Tikva is known in Zionist historiography as Im Hamoshavat, their mother of the colonies. The Zionist religious founders stated that the name Peter Tikva came from the biblical prophecy of Hosea 2:17. The land of Peter Tikva was bought from two Arab absentee landlords based in Jaffa, Salim ul-Qasar and Anton ul-Tayyan. 6 decades after the Nakba, Palestinian citizens of Israel still call the Jewish city of Peter Tikva Mlabis. The Zionist colony of Rehovot was founded in 1890 and was also called after a name mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, but which stood at a completely different location in the Negev desert. Rehovot was set up by middle-class Jewish businessmen and merchants on 10,000 dunams of land purchased from Arab landlords, displacing the Palestinian village of Kirbet Turan. Secular Jewish Zionism was a classic case of the invention of a people in late 19th century Europe and a project for synthesizing a nation. This invented tradition considered the Jews as a race and a biological group, and borrowed heavily from romantic nationalisms in Central and Eastern Europe. Political Zionism mobilized an imagined biblical narrative which was reworked in the late 19th century for the political purposes of a modern European movement intent on colonizing the land of Palestine. As an invented late modern European tradition, Zionism was bound to be a synthesizing project. As Israeli scholar Ronat Lentin has powerfully argued in Israel and the Daughters of the Shoah, Reoccupying the Territories of Silence, 2000, the Israeli masculinized and militarized nationalism has been constructed in opposition to a feminized other. The founding fathers of Zionism reimagined the new Hebrew collectivity in total opposition to the despised Jewish diaspora unable to resist European antisemitism which led to the Holocaust. Zionism's contempt for diaspora Jews and rejection of a feminized diaspora and its obsession with synthesizing a nation is reflected in the fact that its symbols were an amalgam, chosen not only from the Jewish religion and the militant parts of the Hebrew Bible but also from diverse modern traditions and sources, symbols subsequently appropriated as Jewish nationalist, Zionist or Israeli. The music of Israel's national anthem, Har Tikva, came from the Czech national musician, Smetana. Much of the music used in nationalist Israeli songs originated in Russian folk songs. Even the term for an Israeli-born Jew free of all their maladies and abnormalities of exile is in fact the Arabic word sabar, Hebraicized as masculine and tough, Sarbar or Sarbra. Breshith 1989, 131, the prickly pear grown in and around the hundreds of Palestinian villages destroyed by Israel in 1948. Even their national anthem of the Six-Day War, Noemi Shemer's song Jerusalem of Gold, was a plagiarized copy of a Basque lullaby, Masalha 2007, 2039. Seeking to create an authentic, nativized identity, the East European Jewish colonists claimed to represent an indigenous people returning to its homeland after 2,000 years of absence. In fact, Russian or Ukrainian nationals formed the hardcore of Zionist activism. From Palestinian Fule to Jewish Afular, Afular is an Israeli city in the northern district often known as their capital of the valley, due to its strategic location in the Jezreel Valley, Marj ibn Mer. It was founded in 1925 by Zionist settlers after the purchase of large tracts, 60,000 dunams, of Arab land from the Arab absentee landlords of the Sersuk family in Beirut by Yehoshua Hankin, 1864–1945, the Russian-born activist who was responsible for most of the major land purchases for the Jewish Colonial Association in late Ottoman Palestine and early Mandatory Palestine. These tracts became the site of numerous new Zionist colonies, including Dion's Nalal, Gever, Ein Harod, Kfar Yehezkel, Beit Alfer and Tel Yosef, settlements which replaced several Palestinian villages that disappeared from the map, some of which are mentioned by Dion above. The etymology of the Zionist settler toponym Afular is derived from the name of the Palestinian Arab village Ol-Fule, which in 1226 Arab geographer Yaqut ul-Hamari mentioned as being a town in the province of Jund Falastin. The Arabic toponym Ol-Fule is derived from the word ful, for fava beans, which are among the oldest food plant in the Middle East and were widely cultivated by local Palestinians in Marj ibn Mer. The Palestinian village of Ol-Fule itself was depopulated during the Mandatory period. The 9,500 dunams of land of Ol-Fule, which also became the site of the Jewish settlement of Mer Harvir, marked the beginning of a bitter struggle between the indigenous Palestinians and Zionist colonists over the rights of Palestine tenant farmers who had been evicted, and eventually led to the eruption of the Palestiner peasant-based rebellion in 1936–1939. Reflecting on the internal Zionist transfer debates, Bolt Katznelson, one of the most popular and influential leaders of the dominant Mapai party, had this to say in a debate at the World Convention of Ehud Poalit Zion, the highest forum of the dominant Zionist world labor movement, in August 1937. The matter of population transfer has provoked a debate among us. Is it permitted or forbidden? My conscience is absolutely clear in this respect. A remote neighbor is better than a close enemy. They, the Palestinians, will not lose from it. In the final analysis, this is a political and settlement reform for the benefit of both parties. I have long been of the opinion that this is the best of all solutions. I have always believed and still believe that they were destined to be transferred to Syria or Iraq. Cited in Masalha 1992-71. A year later, at the Jewish Agency's Executive Committee of June 1938, Katznelson reiterated his support for a wholesale and a compulsory transfer of the Palestinians and added, regarding the transfer of Arab individuals, "We are always doing this." Cited in Masalha 1992-114. In the early 1940s, Katznelson reminded his colleagues in Mapai that the wholesale evacuation of the Palestinians was the continuation of a natural process that had begun when Zionist settlers had displaced Arab tenant farmers and residents with the establishment of Kibbutz Mer Harvir on the land of Ol-Fule, which had led to a small-scale Arab transfer. Masalha 1992-130. The pure Zionist settle a colony and a monolingual mindset, from Palestinian Arab Mosher and Sajara to Israeli Kfar Taver and Elanir. The Zionist settlement, Mosh Aver, of Kfar Taver was founded in Lower Galilee in 1909 by the Jewish Colonization Association for a group of Ashkenazi settlers from Eastern Europe. The origin of the Hebrew name is neighboring Mount Tabor, the name taken from Psalm 89 verse 12. Throughout the Mandatory period, this settlement was better known to the Zionist leadership of the Yishuv as Mesher, which was the Ashkenazi rendering of the Palestinian Arabic toponym, Mosher. The nearby Zionist settlement Sajira, later renamed Elanir, was established a decade earlier, in 1900–1902, by the Zionist Colonization Association. This too was an Ashkenazi rendering of the Palestinian Arabic name Sajara, Palestinian dialect for tree for one of the earliest and most important Zionist settlements in Palestine. The issue of Hebraicizing Arabic toponyms such as Masalha was not always a top priority of some of the fiercely secular early Zionist settler leaders in Palestine. The establishment of the Technicum in Haifa, now the Technion, by a secular German Zionist organization at the beginning of the 20th century, and the controversy about the language of instruction, German or Hebrew, marked their War of the Languages, Margalit, S. 1994, in the Zionist colony, Yishuv, in Palestine. Some leaders of the left-wing secular Poale Zion Zionist movement, such as Yaakov Zerubbabel, born Yaakov Vitkin in the Ukraine, immigrated to Palestine in 1910, who was a Zionist writer, publisher and editor of a Yiddish newspaper, were strong proponents of Yiddish, a German dialect spoken by the Jewish communities of Central and Eastern Europe. Shared the view of many left-wing secular Zionists that Hebrew was the language of only a few Jewish intellectuals and, therefore, not suitable for the party's goal of reaching the primarily Yiddish-speaking masses in Eastern Europe. Shaver 2004, 97. Yiddish is the historical and literally their mother language, Lashon, of the Ashkenazi Jews, distinguishing it from their holy tongue Lashon Kodesh, meaning Hebrew and Aramaic. Yiddish takes most of its syntax and vocabulary from German, but has loans from Slavic languages and Hebrew and Aramaic. However, for most early Zionist settler leaders, Yiddish was closely associated with the despised and feminized diaspora Ashkenazi Judaism, while modern Hebrew represented the new masculinized settler colonizing Hebrew man. Even Yaakov Vitkin changed his family name to Yaakov Zerubbabel. Thus their War of the Languages in the early Yishuv ended in victory for their new Hebrew, whose ascendancy was central to the formulation of their politico-social myths of Zionism, Azariahu 1995, of political Zionism and the construction of the militant Zionist Jewish national identity of the Yishuv colony. Among the early Zionist workers in Sajarah was David Grun, who immigrated to Palestine from the Polish part of the Russian Empire in 1906 and who later became known as David Ben-Gurion, 1886 to 1973. The founding father of Israel and its first prime minister. The early Zionist settlers, workers and leaders of Sajarah and Mesher, mostly Russian or East European nationals, created a Jewish defense organization in Palestine, Hashmor, Hebrew for the Guard, which was organized in 1909 by socialist Zionists. This was disbanded during the mandatory period after the founding of the Haganah, Hebrew for defense, in 1920, from which the Israeli army emerged in mid-1948. The indigenizing and nativizing strategies of early settlers and leaders of Hashomer included dressing up like local Palestinian Arabs and cultivating an image of the Sabra, their new Jew or the new Hebrew man, rebranded as a native, self-reliant and armed Jew rooted in the land of Palestine. Throughout the British mandatory period, Sajarah, like Mesher, remained better known to the settlers and the entire Zionist leadership of the Yishuv by its Arabic toponym, not its new Hebrew toponym millennia, a place name which was based on the Arabic dialect of the adjacent Palestinian Arab village Ul-Sharajer, tree in Arabic. The Palestinian village Ul-Sharajer was subsequently destroyed by Haganah forces in 1948, and the Zionist colony of Sajarah is known in Israel today as Elanir, which is also the Hebrew rendering of the Arabic toponym for tree. Judaization, Hebraicization and Biblicization strategies. The Zionist colony of Jedira, located 13 kilometers south of Rehovot, was founded by Russian settlers in 1884, and like the colonies of Rehovot, Afular and Hadira, the purchase of its lands from Palestinian landlords involved Yehoshua Hankin. The Jewish Colonial Association gave Jedira a Hebrew-sounding name, Hebrew, wall, after a site supposedly mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. The name Hadira, on the other hand, clearly originated from Ul-Qadra, and Ul-Qadra in local Palestinian dialect, Arabic for green. Although this key Zionist colony, today a major Israeli city, was given a Hebrew-sounding name, this Zionist name makes absolutely no sense in Hebrew. Baron 1996, 38. The lands of the colony of Jedira had been purchased with the help of the French consul in Jaffa, Poliovir. Local Palestinians of Katra had been cultivating the land as tenant farmers when the Jewish settlers arrived, and they resented their intrusion onto what they still thought of as their land. Ketra was an ancient Palestinian center of political and economic authority that, along with 30 other urban sites in regions bordering the Mediterranean Sea, had entered a period of decline in the Late Bronze Age, Zeved 2003. 94, but flourished throughout the Islamic period. Archaeological excavations at Tel Katra discovered a pottery workshop for the manufacture of garza jars. Etymologically, the naming of Jedira by early Zionist settlers closely followed Christian scriptural geography and biblical archaeology of the 19th century, which worked from the narratives of the Bible. Their biblical location was first suggested by Victor Guerin, 1868-1880, 1881-1883. A French biblical archaeologist and scriptural geographer who visited Palestine several times and whose works often referred to passages from the Hebrew Bible and Jewish sources such as the Mishnah and Talmud, as well as works by contemporary scriptural explorers such as Edward Robinson, who, like the medieval crusaders and pilgrims in Maurice Halbwach's L'art topographie légendaire des évangiles et Saint, Études de Mémoire Collective, 1941, using the biblical narratives, decided, largely through speculation, that in more than 100 biblical place names in Palestine, these were the origins of Arabic names used by the Palestinian Falahin. Robinson et al. 1860. Davis 2004, McAllister 1925. Guerin linked the name Jedira to the Palestinian village of Katra, Fisher et al. 2008, which was depopulated and destroyed by Jewish forces in 1948. During the British Mandate of Palestine, it was referred to by local Palestinians as Katrat Islam to distinguish it from the Jewish colony of Katrat Yehud, Jewish Katra, or Jedira, as it was called by the Zionist settlers themselves. In the 1950s, a neighborhood called Oriel, Light of God, was established on the lands of Arab Katra for new Jewish immigrants with visual impairments. Central to the construction of Zionist collective memory and subsequently Israeli identity based on a biblical memory was the Yeshuv's Memorializing Toponymy project, which was established in the 1920s to restore Biblical Hebrew or to create new biblical-sounding names. Ra'ad, 2010, 189. Both the JNF Naming Committee and the Israeli Governmental Names Committee of the 1950s were generally guided by the biblical geography of Victor Guerin, 1868-1880, 1881-1883, and Edward Robinson's biblical researches in Palestine, Mount Sinai and Arabia Petria, 1841, in which he had argued that the place names of Palestinian villages and sites, seemingly Arab, were modern Arabic renderings of Old Hebraic names. An important part of their New Hebrew identity was the Zionist Hebrew toponymy and the Israeli maps, which gradually replaced the Palestinian Arabic names. Cohen and Clyde 1981, 1992, Clyde 1989, Azariahu and Golan 2001, Azariahu and Kook 2002. Zionist toponymic methods and strategies in the post-Nakba period. Key features of the Israeli place names projects. Until 1948, the Zionists were not in control of the toponymic processes in Palestine. Following the mass ethnic cleaning of the Nakba and the Israeli assumption of full control of nearly 80% of historic Palestine, the cultural politics of naming was accelerated radically. State toponymic projects were now used as tools to ensure the effectiveness of the de-Arabization of Palestine. One of these tools consisted of the official Israeli road signs, which are often in Hebrew, Arabic and English, but both the Arabic and the English are transliterations of the New Hebrew place names rather than reflecting the original Palestinian Arabic name. Of course, the overwhelming majority of Israelis cannot read Arabic. This is partly to remind the indigenous Palestinians inside Israel of the need to internalize the New Hebrew place names, or perhaps to seek the express approval of the vanishing Palestinian Arab. Shoah 2010, 264, making Arabs complicit in the de-Arabization of Palestine. Key features and methods of Israeli Zionist renaming patterns and creation of new place name in the post-Nakba period included the role of the Israeli army, the Hebrew Names Committee of 1949, and indigenizing of the European settlers. State-enforced projects, the Israeli Governmental Names Committee, the legendary toponymy of Zionist settlers and the medieval crusaders, toponymicide and the appropriation of Palestinian heritage, silencing of the Palestinian past, mimicry, the de-Arabization of Palestinian place names and assertion of ownership, the creation of a usable past, the power-knowledge nexus, Judaization strategies and the assertion of ownership, the superimposition of biblical, Talmudic and Mishnaic names, fashioning a new European landscape as a site of amnesia and erasure, transliteration of new Hebrew place names and road signs into English and Arabic, post-1967 occupation. The Israeli Army's Hebrew Names Committee of 1949, indigenizing the European settlers and self-renaming. British Jewish historian Sir Lewis Bernstein Namier, 1888–1960, who immigrated to the UK in 1907, was a longtime Zionist and a close friend and associate of Chaim Weizmann. He also worked as political secretary for the Jewish Agency in Palestine, 1929–1931. Namier was born Ludwik Niemirowski in what is now part of Poland, and his devotion to Zionism did not prevent the Anglicization of his name. While name changing among British or American Zionist Jews who emigrated from Eastern Europe became part of the process of Anglicization or Americanization, name changing in Palestine among Zionist settlers began during the mandatory period and became an integral part of the Hebrewization and Biblicization of the immigrant settlers. Brisman 2000, 129. The initiative was begun by Yitzhak Ben-Zvi, the second president of Israel, and by a directive written by Ben-Gurion to army officers that it was their moral duty to Hebraicize their names as an example. As a result, the army set up a Hebrew Names Committee to propose Hebrew names to officers and soldiers in the army. A booklet was compiled by Mordecai Nimtzabai, 1903–1949, the head of the Names Committee. The compilers offered for groups of suggested Hebrew name, family names, names of Tarnum 19 and Amoraim, 20 biblical names and Hebrew personal names. A similar list was compiled a few years later by Yaakov Aricker under the title Beha Shem Mishparhar, Ivri, Select for Yourself a Hebrew Family Name. The booklet, published in Jerusalem in 1954 by the Israeli Academy for the Hebrew Language, which had replaced the Hebrew Language Committee of Eliezer Ben-Yehuda, see below, included advice on how to change family names, and lists of Hebrew names serving as an example. Brisman 2000, 129. Hybridity, Hebraicizing and the Myth of Restoration, Eliezer Ben-Yehuda, the Committee of the Hebrew Language and Founding Myths of Modern Hebrew. Although Eastern European Jewish settlers claimed to represent an indigenous people returning to its homeland after 2,000 years of absence, in fact Russian nationals formed the hardcore of Zionist activism. This self-re-indigenization and copying from the Arabic language and Palestinian Arab toponyms required a great deal of effort to create the mythological New Hebrew Sabra man and construct a new Jewish identity. No wonder, for the early Zionist settlers were intent not only on inventing a land and inventing a nation, Rapkin 2010, 130, but also on inventing a new language and identity, reinventing their own new, Hebrew imagined biblical identity. The post-1948 period saw top Zionist leaders, army commanders, biblical archaeologists and authors changing their names from Russian, Polish and German to authentic, Hebrew-sounding, biblical names. Despite the Semitization of European Jews by linguistic and racial theorists in the second half of the 19th century, in fact modern Hebrew was invented by Ashkenazi Zionists in the early 20th century not as a Semitic language, but rather as a hybrid language, with European vocabulary and strong European connections, a cultural space with which new settlers of the Zionist colony, Yishuv, in Palestine felt at home. The Zionist Yishuv, Pure Colony, Kimmeling 2003, 22, in Palestine became a new form of exile for which a new, strongly European, New Hebrew provided one of the key links to the old European cultural space. However, for early European Zionist leaders, to build a new homeland state in Palestine required the invention of a new language and the founding national myths and something altogether different, a new secular modern Ashkenazi Hebrew language. Many early Zionists called themselves New Hebrews and not Jews, and, as we shall see below, deliberately changed their European Yiddish, Russian, Polish or German names to sound more Hebraic, more biblical. For a well-known example, David Grun initially became David Green after immigrating to Palestine, and subsequently David Ben-Gurion. However, the key inventor and a father of modern Hebrew was Eliezer Ben-Yehuda, formerly Lazar Perlman, (1858 to 1922), who became a legendary hero of Zionism on a par with the founding father of political Zionism, Theodor Herzl. As a cultural Zionist, Ben Yehuda regarded modern Hebrew and Zionism as symbiotic. He was hugely influential in the fashioning of a new Hebrew collective identity rooted in an invented ancient consciousness. This was based on the transformation of liturgical Hebrew from a dormant, almost dead language to a new language spoken today by millions of Israelis. Today, Ben Yehuda is revered in Israel as the instigator of the Hebrew language resurrection and revival, and the creator of a modern Zionist vernacular. Today, Rehov Ben Yehuda Street, in central West Jerusalem, commemorates the creator of Israeli Hebrew. But Ben Yehuda was also the founding father of modern Hebrew, and he was responsible for its two myths. The myth of Hebrew restoration, the myth that modern Hebrew is a Semitic language. As we shall see below, modern Hebrew was in reality a new language, a Semito-European hybrid. Ben Yehuda himself saw himself not only as the inventor of modern Hebrew but also as an inventor of their Jewish people. Point 21 he wrote, "There are two things without which the Jews will not become a people: the country Haaretz, i.e. Palestine, and the language Harlashon. Hybridization and patterns of early Zionist borrowing from, and modeling on, Arabic and Aramaic. Believing that Arabic and Aramaic have preserved the ancient character of Proto-Semitic language, Ben Yehuda favored a strong reliance upon Arabic and Aramaic in the creation of modern Hebrew in Palestine, although in reality modern Hebrew became a new Semito-European hybrid language borrowing many words from Yiddish, Arabic, Aramaic, Ladino, Latin, Greek, Polish, Russian, English and other European languages. However, the patterns pursued by Ben Yehuda of borrowing from and modeling on Arabic built upon previous extensive Hebrew borrowings and morphological modeling on Arabic that took place during the Golden Age of Arab Islamic civilization. Although the influence of Arabic on modern Hebrew cannot be attributed entirely to Ben Yehuda or his Hebrew Language Committee, 22 many of the new words coined by Ben Yehuda under the influence of Arabic became part of the standard Hebrew language of today. 23 examples of the Hebrew words coined by Ben Yehuda on the basis of Arabic words included qatar, locomotive, which he borrowed from the Arabic qatar, tariq, date, from the Arabic tariq, history, dating, and adiv, polite, which comes from the Arabic adib, cultured. Point 24 morphological patterns modeled on Arabic are found in the modern Hebrew greeting Boker Tov, good morning, and its refrain Boker, or morning of light, modeled after the Arabic Sabar Oker, good morning, and Sabar an-Nur, morning of light, Shehadar 1998, 60. It should be borne in mind that the reference here is not only to patterns of direct borrowings from Arabic, but also to loan translation, words modeled closely after Arabic, consisting of the speech material of Arabic. As we will see below, this modeling on and loan translation from Arabic would subsequently have a major impact on the transformation of Palestinian Arab toponyms into Israeli Hebrew toponyms by the Israeli Names Committee. Ben Yehuda was born Laza Pelman in the Lithuanian village of Lushki, and attended a Talmudic school in Belarus in the Russian Empire. A linguistic utopian and a secular linguistic Zionist, the most influential lexicographer of the Zionist vernacular also borrowed many words from literary and colloquial Arabic, Greek, Aramaic and other languages. A newspaper editor, Ben Yehuda immigrated to Palestine in 1881 and became the driving spirit behind this Zionist vernacular revolution. Stevens 2008, Rapkin 2006, 54-57, 2010, 132. At that time the Jews in Jerusalem spoke Arabic, Yiddish and French. Ben Yehuda set out to resurrect and develop a new language that could replace Yiddish, in particular, and other languages spoken by the European Zionist colonists in Palestine. He had studied history and politics of the Middle East at the Sorbonne University in Paris and learned Palestinian colloquial Arabic. In the 4 years he spent at the Sorbonne he took Hebrew classes. It was this experience in Paris and his exposure to the rise of French linguistic nationalism at the end of the 19th century that inspired Ben Yehuda Pelman to attempt the resurrection of Hebrew as a practical and Zionist nationalist cultural project. After arriving in Palestine in 1881, Laza Pelman changed his name to Eliezer Ben Yehuda, son of Judah, and became the first to use modern Hebrew as a vernacular and transform it from a biblical language and a language of liturgy, Lashon HaKodesh, into a secular nationalist, modern language. Ben Yehuda's second wife Porla Baylor took the Hebrew name Hemder, and he raised his son, Ben Zion, son of Zion, speaking only modern Hebrew by totally isolating him and refusing to let him be exposed to other languages during childhood. Ben Yehuda served as editor of a number of Hebrew-language newspapers, including Hartzvi, the Deer. The latter was closed down for a year by the Ottoman authorities following fierce opposition from the Orthodox Jewish community of Jerusalem, which viewed his work as sacrilegious. Jerusalem was a predominantly Arabic-speaking city, whose Jewish residents spoke both Arabic and Yiddish and objected to the use of their holy tongue Lashon HaKodesh, Hebrew, for everyday conversation. Other local Jews ridiculed the new Hebrew as a fabricated, hybrid language. In Jerusalem, Ben Yehuda became a central figure in the establishment of the Hebrew Language Committee, V'ayad Har Lashon Har, Ivrit. It was initially set up in 1890, operated for 1 year, disbanded and then revived in 1904. Ben Yehuda was its first president. Ben Yehuda's linguistic efforts were crowned with success when the British colonial authorities in Palestine decided in 1922, under a Zionist Jewish High Commissioner, Herbert Samuels, to recognize modern Hebrew as one of the 3 official languages of British Mandatory Palestine, alongside Arabic and English. Ben Yehuda's committee was replaced by the Israeli Academy of the Hebrew Language, which was established following an act of the Israeli Knesset, passed on the 27th of August 1953, as the Supreme Institute of the Hebrew Language and located in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. As modern Hebrew became more widely spoken among East European Zionist settlers in Palestine, the Hebrew Language Committee began to publish bulletins and dictionaries and coined thousands of words that are in everyday use today in Israel. The committee's president, Ben Yehuda, also compiled the first modern Hebrew dictionary. Ben Yehuda argued that Arabic, a living fellow Semitic language, rather than European languages, should fill modern Hebrew lacunae, seeing Arabic as a major source for missing roots and new words in Hebrew. Shehadar 1998. 6162. Ben Yehuda's claims, made in a 1914 article entitled Sources to Fill Their Lacunae in Our Language, echoed similar claims put forward by Western biblical archaeologists and scriptural geographers in the 19th century such as Edward Robinson and Victor Guerin. He wrote, "The majority of the roots found in the Arabic vocabulary were once part of the Hebrew lexicon, and all of these roots are not foreign, nor are Arabic, but are ours, which we lost and have now found again." Ben Yehuda 1914, 9. See also Blau 1981, 32. Ben Yehuda, then head of the Jerusalem-based Committee of the Hebrew Language, insisted on the relevance of Arabic for reviving the dead language of Hebrew and reinventing modern Ashkenazi Hebrew. Joshua Blau, Professor Emeritus of Arabic Languages and Literature at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and President of the Israeli Academy of the Hebrew Language, 1981-1993, writes that Ben Yehuda insisted on the usefulness of living Arabic in order to supplement the deficiencies of the Hebrew language. The committee coins words according to the rules of grammar and linguistic analogy from Semitic roots, Aramaic and especially from Arabic roots. Blau 1981, 33. Self-invention, self-indigenization and self-antiquation, personal name changing by members of the predatory Zionist Ashkenazi elite of Israel. The change from a Yiddish family name such as Pelman to a Hebrew family name such as Ben Yehuda provided many Zionist settlers in Palestine with a prototype for emulation in a process of self-invention and self-indigenization. This process also inspired Prime Minister and Defense Minister David Ben-Gurion, who used the Israeli army after 1948 to impose general Hebraicization and purification procedures of family and personal names. Ben-Gurion himself was born David Grun in Russia. His mother was called Scheindel and his Russian-born wife was called Pauline Munweiss when she met and married Ben-Gurion in New York. She later changed her name to Porler. After immigrating to Palestine, David Grun became David Green, and he subsequently changed his family name to the biblical-sounding and literally lionized and predatory name David Ben-Gurion, literally, son of the lion cub. He also chose a biblical-sounding name for his daughter Julah, Redemption, and his son Amos, after a minor prophet. In the Hebrew Bible, for Ben-Gurion, the invention of a Hebrew tradition and the synthesizing of a nation meant that the Hebrew Bible became not a religious document or a repository of theological assertions. It was reinvented as a nationalized and racialized sacred text central to the modern foundational myths of secular Zionism. As a primordialist ideology of secular nationalism, asserting the antiquity of Jewish nationalism, Smith, A. 1986, 1989, 343-67, and inspired by Eurocentric Volkish and racial ideologies, Ben-Gurion's Zionism viewed the Bible in an entirely functional way. The biblical language, narrative, and place names functioned as a mobilizing myth and as an historical account of Jews titled to the land, a claim not necessarily borne out by recent archaeological findings. For Ben-Gurion, it was not important whether the biblical narrative and place names were an objective and true record of actual historical events and the past. It is not entirely clear whether Ben-Gurion assumed that the ancient events the Israeli state was reenacting had actually occurred, but, as he explains, it is not important whether the biblical story is a true record of an event or not. What is of importance is that this is what the Jews believed as far back as the period of the First Temple, Pullman 1965. 227, also Rose 2004-9. Like Ben-Gurion, many secular labor Zionists displayed from the outset a deeply ambivalent attitude towards religion. Although the movement's name is derived from the word Zion, which was originally the name of a fortress in Jerusalem, Zionism reinvented Judaism and translated Jewish themes into political action. Furthermore, Zionism had ambitions to create a new Hebrew society that would be different from Jewish life in the diaspora and did not see multi-religious and pluralistic Jerusalem as the appropriate place for the founding of such a new society. Not only was it full of aliens, native Palestinian Arabs, but it was also inhabited by the peaceful, old Jewish Yishuv, whose members were part of the anti-Zionist ultra-Orthodox community. It is no wonder, therefore, that the Zionists preferred to build the new and pure Jewish city of Tel Aviv on the Mediterranean coast, just outside the Palestinian city of Jaffa. Tel Aviv was founded in 1910 in a region which, according to the Bible, was ruled by the Philistines, not the Israelites, from the 12th century BC onwards. It was named after a Babylonian city mentioned in Ezekiel 3:15. But the ethno-religious purity of the European Hebrew colony, the new Yishuv, was best illustrated by the fact that during the mandatory period its Zionist leaders preferred to live in the demographically exclusive Tel Aviv rather than in multi-religious Jerusalem or Jaffa. Those Zionist immigrants who chose to live in Jerusalem settled outside the historic city and built new Jewish neighborhoods and the first Jewish university, the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Tel Aviv remained home to their Hebrew, Histadrut, and all the Hebrew daily papers, and while Zionist leaders of the new Yishuv continued to swear by the name of Jerusalem, they did not live there, and most of the Jewish immigrants to Palestine, about 80%, settled along the Mediterranean coast, a region that, according to Avis Hai Margalit, of the Hebrew University, had never been the historic homeland of the Jewish people. 25 The invention of a new masculine collective memory was based on hegemonic state power. They're a new Hebrew, a language, they're a new Hebrew man, a new and militarized society, and an exclusively Jewish Hebrew city, Tel Aviv, a new Yishuv, settle a colony, and the new and Hebrew workers of the Histadrut, the General Federation of Hebrew Workers in the Land of Israel. Established in 1920, the militarized Histadrut and military service were central to the Zionist project of conquest. They represented that newly constructed muscular and militant national identity. The militarized Histadrut, in particular, dominated both the economic and military security infrastructure of the Zionist Yishuv and played a major role in immigration, land settlement and colonization, economic activities, labor employment and military organization and defense, the Haganah, with trade union activity as only one part of its activities. 26 Palestinian citizens of Israel were not admitted as members until 1959. The Histadrut became central to this drive designed to create a new settlement of blood and common descent and redeem their biblical soil by conquest. In the 1920s, the Zionist labor leadership also began to develop a boycott strategy in Palestine. Thus, in 1929, Ben-Gurion wrote of the need for an iron wall of Zionist workers' settlements surrounding every Hebrew city and town, land and human bridge that would link isolated points and which would be capable of enforcing the doctrine of exclusive Hebrew labor avoda, Ivrit, and a Hebrew soil, Adarmar, Ivrit, Masalha 1992, 24-25. Although deeply secular, Ben-Gurion's Zionism instrumentally emphasized Jewish religion and Jewish ethnicity, promoted the cult and mythologies of ancient Israel and biblical battles, promoted the revival of a seemingly dead language, Hebrew, built up what became a powerful army, surrounded its ethnically exclusive, pure colony, the Yishuv, with an iron wall, Schlein 2000, Masalha 2000, and waged a bitter struggle for political independence and territorial expansion throughout the land of Palestine. In an article entitled, Naming the Landscape, the Formation of the Hebrew Map of Israel 1949-1960, Israeli political geographers Maoz Azariahu and Arnon Golan write, the importance assigned to Hebrew as the language and culture of national revival was also manifest in the emphasis upon Hebrew purity and Hebraicization procedures. Hebraicization included the introduction of Hebrew nomenclatures in various fields of scientific knowledge, e.g., botany or zoology. Of special political bearing and with far-reaching personal consequences was the Hebraicization of family names of Jewish immigrants. This measure belonged to the construction of a new Hebrew identity. In the first years of Israeli independence, Ben-Gurion, the founding father of modern Israel, used his authority to promote Hebrew family names. In his capacity as a defense minister, he made the Hebraicization of family names obligatory for Israeli officials serving in representative positions, e.g. high-ranking army officers and diplomats. Azariahu and Golan 2001, 182. Anthroponymastics, or anthroponymy, is the study of personal names. Zionist toponymic and anthroponymic projects were central to Zionist settler colonization strategies in Palestine, and these included not only Hebraization, Biblicization and Judaization of the country, but also self-indigenization, self-antiquation. Personal names such Alan, Oak, Arabic, Balat, and Aloni, my oak, became very popular in Zionist settlers' indigenizing strategies. Palestine oak, Quercus calabrinos, and Pistacia palestina are internationally famous, indigenous trees common to Palestine, the eastern Mediterranean region and the Levant, especially Palestine, Syria and Lebanon. Pistacia palestina adds brilliant red to the Galilee landscape. Of the three species of oak found in modern Palestine, their prickly evergreen oak, Quercus coccifera, is the most abundant. It covers the rocky hills of Palestine with dense brushwood of trees, and for many centuries the traditional Palestinian plough, used in preparation for sowing seeds or to loosen or turn the soil, was made of oak wood. Like the Palestinian olive tree, Oak Palestine is another key symbol of Palestine and Palestinian life. The oak tree of Palestine played a major part in Palestinian stories for children and generally in Palestinian cultural memory and folklore. Within the Zionist strategies, there is a long list of Zionist leaders who formally changed their names from Russian and East European to Hebrew-sounding names. Many changed their names following Ben-Gurion's military directives after the establishment of Israel in 1948. While only a small minority of East European Jews who had migrated to the US or Britain chose voluntarily to anglicize their names, members of almost the entire Zionist elite of Israel were pressurized after May 1948 to change their European names to authentic-sounding biblical ones. In fact, this intense pressure was applied almost immediately after the establishment of Israel in May 1948. It was applied top-down by Prime Minister and Defense Minister David Ben-Gurion, who effectively ordered all senior officers of the Israeli army to change their European surnames. Yigal Sukenik, Chief of Operations and Acting Chief of Staff of the Army in 1948, was the first to comply. On June 28, 1948, Ben-Gurion swore in the members of the IDF High Command, insisting that each one adopted a Hebrew last name. Since most chose their Haganah code names, Yigal Sukenik became Yigal Yardin Parsashov 1997. 220. The following biblicization list includes almost the entire political, military and intellectual Israeli elite, left, right and center. David Ben-Gurion, 1886 to 1973, Israeli Prime Minister and Defense Minister, used the Israeli army after 1948 to impose general Hebraicization and purification of family and personal names. He was born David Grun in Russia. His mother was called Scheindel and his Russian-born wife was called Porline Munweiss when she met and married him in New York. She later changed her name to Porler. Moshe Sherrod was born Moshe Shertok in Russia in 1894. He became Israel's foreign minister in 1948. He chose to Hebraicize his last name in 1949. Following the creation of the State of Israel. Golda Meir was born Golda Mabovich in Kiev in 1898, later called Golda Myasin. Interestingly, she Hebraicized her last name only after she became foreign minister in 1956. She was prime minister 1969-1974. Yitzhak Shamir, 27, was born Itzhak Jazirnicki in eastern Poland in 1915. He was foreign minister 1981 to 1982 and prime minister 1983 to 1984 and 1988 to 1992. Ariel Sharon was born Ariel Scheinemann in colonial Palestine in 1928 to Shmuel and Vera, later Hebraicized to Dvorah, immigrants to Palestine from Russia. He was prime minister 2001 to 2006. Yitzhak Ben-Zvi was born in 1884 in the Ukraine as Yitzhak Shimshilevich, the son of Tzvi Shimshilevich, who later took the name Tzvi Shimshi. He was the second president of Israel. Yigal Allon, commander of the Parmer in 1948 and later acting prime minister of Israel, was born Yigal Peikowitz in the settlement of Mosher, Kfar Taver. His father immigrated to Palestine from Eastern Europe in 1890. Menahem Begin, the founder of the current ruling Likud party and the sixth prime minister of Israel, was born in Brest-Litovsk, then part of the Russian Empire, as Myaksislo Begun. Yitzhak Ben-Zvi's wife, Ral Yainate, born in the Ukraine as Golda Lashensky and immigrated to Palestine in 1908. She was a labor Zionist leader and a co-founder of the Greater Land of Israel movement in 1967. Apparently she Hebraicized her name to Ral Yainate in memory of the Hasmonean king Alexander Junius, Hellenized name of Alexander Yenai, 126 to 76 BC, a territorial expansionist who during a 27-year reign was almost constantly involved in military conflict and who enlarged the Hasmonean kingdom. Her two sons, born during their British Mandatory period, were given biblical names: Amram, named after the father of Moses and Aaron, and Eli, named after the high priest Eli. Levi Eshkol was born in the Ukraine in 1895 as Levi Skolnik. He was Israel's third prime minister, 1963 to 1999. Pinhas Lavon, 1904 to 1976, was born Pinhas Lubianiker in what is now Ukraine and moved to Palestine in 1929. He was defense minister in 1954 and labor leader. Yitzhak Ben Aaron, 1906 to 2006, was an Israeli politician who became a general secretary of the Histadrut and held a cabinet post. He was born Yitzhak Nussenbaum in what is today Romania and immigrated to Palestine in 1928. Dov Yosef, 1899-1980, an Israeli labor politician who held ministerial positions in 9 Israeli governments, was born Bernard Joseph in Montreal, Canada. David Remez was born David Drabkin in Belarus in 1886. He was Israel's first Minister of Transportation. Zalman Shazar, the third president of Israel, from 1963 to 1973, who immigrated to Palestine in 1921, was born in the Russian Empire as Shneur Zalman Rubashov. Pinhas Rutenberg, 1879 to 1942, a prominent Zionist leader and the founder of the Palestine Electric Company, which became the Israel Electric Corporation, was born in the Ukraine as Pyotr Moiseyevich Rutenberg. Avram Granot, 1890 to 1962, Director General of the Jewish National Fund and later chairman of its board, was born in today's Moldova as Abraham Granovsky. He changed his name after 1948. Fejel Anit, 1909-2002, was an Israeli Mapan politician born in the Russian Empire as Fage Heinz, to Sharagar Heinz and Hannah Shkop. She immigrated to Palestine in 1929. Shimon Peres was born in Poland in 1923 as Simon Paski. He was Israel's 8th prime minister and in 2007 was elected as its 9th president. Right-wing Russian Zionist leader Zeev Jabotinsky, 1880 to 1940, the founder of revisionist Zionism, changed his name from Vladimir Yevgenyevich Jabotinsky during the mandatory period, choosing a predatory name, Zeev, wolf. Prominent labor leader Chaim Arlazarov, 1899 to 1933, was born Vitaly Arlazarov, General